Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I still remember the moment the room froze. Or maybe it was just me. The second I walked into that fundraiser party, the one my ex-wife organized for her mindfulness community, every pair of eyes shifted from the stage to the woman beside me. Claire didn't have to say a word. She carried herself with a calm, grounded kind of beauty, not loud, not flashy, just real. And in a room full of people chasing illusions, real hit like a spotlight. My ex, Jenna, noticed us before anyone else. She was standing near the bar, holding a cup of Starbucks like it was a spiritual artifact. Her smile slipped just a little when she saw Claire touch my arm. Not enough for the people around her to notice, but enough for me, the man who once knew every version of her face. Someone beside her tried to keep the conversation going, talking about their latest inner alignment retreat, but Jenna wasn't listening. Her eyes stayed locked on us. I didn't stop. I didn't nod. I didn't greet her. I just walked deeper into the room with Claire beside me, her hand brushing mine, soft, steady. She'd met me after the worst months of my life, when I'd come home from night shifts smelling like smoke while Jenna whispered about energetic blockages and spent hours scrolling Amazon for crystals she claimed would heal what I refused to face. Funny how she never said what exactly I was refusing to face. The crowd parted for us instinctively. I think the turnout was bigger than last year. Jenna always bragged about that, but tonight the place felt small. I could even hear the faint hum of a Walmart delivery truck outside the venue doors. The world kept moving, indifferent to who had spiritually evolved and who hadn't. Jenna finally stepped away from her group. Her dress shimmered under the lights, but it was the wrong kind of shine, bright, forced, hollow. I heard one of her followers whisper that I'd leveled up, and the phrase almost made me laugh. They used words like these for people who posted inspirational quotes, but never faced a real fire. Claire leaned in slightly. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. I was. More than okay. Because for the first time since Jenna replaced me with a guru who lived in a rented condo above a vape shop, she didn't have access to me. That access was gone the moment I parked my Chevy Silverado outside and stepped out a different man. Jenna knew it, too. Her eyes told me everything she'd lost before she even reached us. I didn't expect Mark to be there. He wasn't part of Jenna's coaching circle, never pretended to understand their vibrational language. He'd been my lieutenant at the station for 7 years, a man who could read smoke patterns the way Jenna claimed she could read people's auras. When I spotted him across the room, hands in his pockets, scanning the crowd like he was assessing a fire hazard, I understood instantly that this night was about to turn in a direction Jenna couldn't control. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. Not approval, not surprise, more like confirmation. Like he already knew why I'd come and what it would do to her. As Claire and I moved closer to the silent auction table, I heard him speaking to someone behind me. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried anyway. He said Jenna had been spending more time at her mentor's studio than at home. He said she talked about ascending past relationships that were too grounded in physical reality. It wasn't gossip. Mark didn't do gossip. It was an observation, stated with the same tone he used when reporting a gas leak. I didn't react. Claire's hand slipped into mine, and I kept my face calm, neutral. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not even hurt. Just clarity. I realized Mark had seen the signs long before I admitted them. And if he saw them, others did too. Jenna's betrayal wasn't loud or physical, but it was unmistakable. She'd given another man the position she once swore belonged only to me, the center of her belief system. Behind me, someone mentioned they'd seen her mentor's new grounding rituals advertised on Amazon. Another person said they caught Jenna at Target last week buying supplies for an upcoming rebirth seminar. Their words weren't judgmental, just matter of fact. That was the difference. No one was shocked. They simply understood she'd drifted into a world where everything was symbolic except the damage it left. When Jenna noticed Mark looking at her with that steady, firefighter stare, the one that saw through smoke and excuses, her confidence faltered. Only for a second, but long enough. She realized people had noticed more than she ever intended. And she realized I'd noticed too. I didn't need proof the way people usually mean it. Not screenshots, not confessions, not the dramatic kind of evidence that blows up a marriage overnight. What I needed was understanding, quiet, steady, undeniable. And I got it that night, in pieces that fit together too neatly to ignore. As Claire slipped away to get us drinks, I stood near a display of donation envelopes and listened without appearing to. Two women from Jenna's circle were talking a few feet behind me, unaware that I was close enough to catch every word. One mentioned Jenna's private guidance sessions with her mentor, the kind scheduled late at night when the studio's lights were off, but his candles were still burning. Another said Jenna had shifted her entire business model around his teachings, calling him her spiritual anchor. They spoke casually, like it was common knowledge, not a secret. And that told me more than anything else. Then came the piece I wasn't expecting. One of them said Jenna had shown up to their last workshop upset because her mentor had challenged her attachment patterns and told her she was spiritually tethered to someone who hadn't evolved yet. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. I felt the corner of my mouth tighten, not from pain, but from the realization that Jenna hadn't drifted, she'd replaced. She'd handed her loyalty, her admiration, her sense of truth to a man who sold enlightenment in weekend packages. And she'd done it long before our marriage officially cracked. When I turned, I saw Mark again, watching me with that same calm expression. He didn't approach. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He simply noted the way the truck keys in my hand didn't move, how my breathing never changed. He'd seen this version of me before, the one that shifted inward, the one that stopped reacting and started recalibrating. Claire returned with 2 glasses of water. She didn't ask why my expression had changed, but she noticed. She always did. I took the glass, nodded, and let the room blur for a moment. Jenna was across the venue, laughing too loudly now, pretending she wasn't monitoring every inch of my movements. And in that moment, something inside me settled. I no longer needed her explanations or apologies. The evidence wasn't digital. It was behavioral. It was spiritual. It was enough. And she still hadn't realized I was already pulling away. I didn't disappear all at once. That kind of exit leaves too much noise, too many questions, too much space for someone like Jenna to twist the narrative into something spiritual or symbolic. My shift started quietly, almost invisibly, the same way a controlled burn changes direction when the wind decides it's done cooperating. That night, standing in the middle of her carefully curated world, surrounded by people who whispered about energy, but couldn't recognize emotional abandonment when it stood in front of them, I realized it was time to pull back completely. Not out of anger, out of necessity. When Claire excused herself to check on a friend, I slipped outside for air. I didn't go far, just to the edge of the parking lot, where my truck sat under one of the dim security lights. I remembered the first time Jenna told me she needed space to grow, how she said it right after a late-night session with her mentor. She claimed she was learning to detach from external validation. The irony was that she'd become dependent on his validation instead. That memory didn't sting anymore. It was just data now, evidence of a pattern I'd ignored. I took out my phone, turned it over in my hand, and then powered it off completely. No notifications, no calls, no access. The silence felt clean, like the calm after a fire's been contained. I slid the phone into the truck and shut the door. Even from there, through the venue windows, I could see Jenna scanning the room for me. She tried to look casual, chatting with someone who was showing her a new meditation kit they'd ordered from Amazon, but her eyes kept drifting toward the entrance. She'd always been good at pretending she was above panic, but she wasn't above losing control. When I stepped back inside, I didn't return to her line of sight. I moved through the back hallway, past volunteers organizing supplies from Target for the raffle tables, and let myself blend into the quiet edges of the event. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. Not even Mark. He saw me from across the room, noted the change, and didn't interfere. He understood what was happening. I wasn't leaving the party. I was leaving her orbit, and she felt it before she even realized I was gone. I didn't plan to learn anything about the man Jenna called her mentor. I didn't need to. But sometimes the truth walks straight toward you, even when you stay completely still. It happened near the silent auction area, where a handful of donors were studying the bid sheets. I was standing with Claire again, listening to her describe a community program she wanted to support, when 2 people behind us started talking about him. Jenna's guide, her spiritual authority, the man she claimed had helped her transcend the limits of the physical world. They weren't whispering. They weren't cautious. They sounded irritated, almost embarrassed, mentioning that he'd been charging extra fees for private sessions that weren't supposed to exist. Someone else said he'd used money from their last retreat to cover his personal expenses instead of the group fund. Words like mismanaged, misallocated, and questionable invoices drifted through the air with more weight than any of the affirmations posted along the walls. The final detail came when one woman said she'd seen a list of vendor payments he'd submitted for reimbursement, several of which didn't match the receipts she knew were on file. I didn't react. I didn't lean closer. I simply listened, letting the information settle like ash after a fire. This wasn't scandal. It was leverage. Not something I would weaponize, not a tool for revenge, but a reminder of who Jenna had handed her loyalty to. A man who preached alignment but lived off other people's blind trust. When Claire excused herself to check on the dessert table, I stepped toward the back office, just far enough to overhear the event coordinator talking to a volunteer. They mentioned the mentor had submitted yet another late request for reimbursement, this time for materials he'd supposedly picked up at Walmart for a workshop. The volunteer laughed quietly, saying she'd been with him all afternoon and knew he hadn't bought anything. She said he liked to stretch the truth to match his spiritual needs. That was the moment everything clicked. Jenna had replaced me with someone who manipulated faith the way others manipulate numbers. And the people around her were finally starting to see it. I didn't expose him. I didn't need to. All I had to do was step back and let his own structure collapse under the weight of its inconsistencies. Jenna had chosen a man who built illusions. And illusions never survive contact with reality. The shift in the room didn't happen all at once. It moved slowly, like heat spreading through drywall before anyone sees flames. One moment the party was buzzing with soft music and spiritual jargon, and the next there was a thin, unmistakable tension threading through the conversations. I didn't cause it. I didn't have to. People had begun connecting dots on their own, and Jenna could feel every one of them tightening around her. It started near the raffle tables. A small group of her followers stood in a loose circle, talking in low voices. I wasn't close enough to hear the words, but I watched their eyes flick toward Jenna and then away just as quickly. Not avoidance, realization. The kind that comes when truth stops being optional. One woman, the same one who'd mentioned the reimbursement issue earlier, looked at Jenna with a softness that wasn't sympathy. It was the kind of look people give when they finally admit to themselves that someone isn't who they claim to be. Mark joined me by the wall, keeping enough distance to avoid drawing attention. He didn't say a word, but his presence was grounding, the same way it always was at a fire scene. He noticed the way people were slowly shifting away from Jenna, how the ones who used to orbit her now kept conversations short, tight, uncomfortable. Someone mentioned the mentor again, saying his teachings seemed to mirror whatever he'd most recently read online. Another person said they saw inconsistencies in his financial reports, the same ones tied to those questionable Walmart purchases. No accusation, just quiet acknowledgement. When Jenna approached a group near the stage, the entire circle fell silent. Not out of respect, out of scrutiny. One of them finally spoke, asking if she'd known about the discrepancies in the retreat budget. She tried to laugh it off, claiming everything was intentional, part of a larger energetic realignment. But her voice had that brittle edge she couldn't hide from me. Someone else stepped forward, a man I recognized from previous events, and said he'd noticed her mentor preaching detachment while demanding absolute loyalty. Then he said the words that cut through the entire room. "You really thought no one would notice?" Jenna froze. She'd spent years trying to ascend above reality. But reality had finally caught up. Jenna didn't crumble right away. She tried to hold the room with that same polished confidence she'd practiced during her live streams, the ones where she talked about inner power while reading from notes she'd printed off Amazon. But confidence doesn't survive isolation, and isolation was spreading around her like a slow, cold fog. I watched it from the edge of the room, not hiding, not participating, just observing the way she kept turning her head as if the crowd might shift back toward her if she found the right angle. They didn't. Claire stayed beside me, her presence steady and warm, but never intrusive. She didn't ask how I felt or what happened between Jenna and me. She simply stood with me the way people do when they know you've already said everything you needed to through action. The music softened toward the end of the playlist, and in that dimmer atmosphere, Jenna seemed smaller, like the lights had pulled their attention from her just as the people had. A few of her closest clients approached her, asked quiet questions, then drifted away without waiting for real answers. They weren't angry. They were disappointed. Mark walked past me, paused for half a second, and nodded toward where Jenna stood by herself. He didn't smirk or show pity. He just acknowledged the moment, the first time she'd been truly alone in a place she used to command. I stepped a little to the side, giving him room, letting him take a call from the station without drawing attention. Even then, Jenna kept glancing my way, like she was trying to sense the version of me she used to know and couldn't find him anywhere in the room. A volunteer carrying a box of Target supplies brushed past her without noticing. Someone else moved a stack of chairs and didn't pause to ask if Jenna needed anything. Her influence, once effortless, had evaporated. And in that sudden quiet, she finally understood what she'd lost. Not me specifically, not yet, but the stability she'd built her identity on. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was simply unreachable. I'd stopped being the man who absorbed her chaos. And she realized she had no bridge left to cross back to me. Jenna waited until the crowd thinned out, until the hum of conversation dissolved into soft echoes against the walls. She always preferred controlled moments, spaces where she could steer the energy, where she could perform calmness and call it clarity. But tonight she was operating without an audience, and the absence of witnesses made her movements smaller, tighter. She stood near the corner where volunteers were packing leftover supplies into a cardboard box, her hands clasped, her breathing uneven. Claire had stepped away to help someone gather donation sheets, leaving me in a rare pocket of stillness. That's when Jenna moved. She crossed the room slowly, the heels she'd bragged about ordering from Amazon clicking softly against the floor. People noticed her approaching me, but no one stepped closer. They'd seen enough tonight to understand they weren't part of this. When she reached me, she didn't speak right away. She just looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. It didn't suit her. She'd built an entire persona on the idea that she was unshakable, that she could read people's intentions with a single glance. But she couldn't read me now. That was the point. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was calm on the surface but threaded with panic underneath. She asked if we could align for a moment, said there'd been misunderstandings, said I'd been distant lately. Her words weren't confrontational, they were searching. She was trying to find the version of me she once depended on, the one who absorbed her doubts and fears and let her mentor fill the cracks with empty philosophies. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but because nothing she said required a response. Silence was the only language that made sense between us now. She shifted, trying again, saying she didn't expect to see me with someone like Claire, someone who looked grounded enough to make her own certainty feel counterfeit. She didn't accuse me. She didn't apologize. She hovered in the space between. A volunteer walked past carrying a Target bag, and Jenna flinched slightly at being interrupted. For the first time, she wasn't the center of anything. I watched her, steady and silent, and she finally understood the truth. I was no longer part of her narrative. I had stepped out, and there was no version of me she could summon back. Jenna didn't break in a single moment. It happened in layers, each one slipping away as the night wound down and reality pressed in. By the time most of the guests had left, her confidence had thinned to something fragile. She lingered near the folding tables while volunteers packed decorations, her posture too still, her eyes drifting toward the doorway as if hoping someone, anyone, would offer her the validation she used to receive without effort. No one did. Even the most devoted members of her circle avoided her gaze, pretending to focus on stacking chairs or sorting leftover flyers. The mentor she'd built her identity around wasn't there, and the people who had once echoed her teachings now kept polite distance. Claire returned to my side, brushing dust from her hands after helping with the cleanup. She didn't touch me, didn't lean in, didn't claim space. She didn't have to. Her presence alone grounded me the way real things do, quiet, steady, uncomplicated. And Jenna saw it. I could feel her watching from across the room, torn between anger and desperation. The contrast between them, between the woman who preached transformation and the woman who lived it, hung in the air like smoke after a burn. Mark finished a call near the exit, his face unreadable, then glanced at Jenna. He nodded once to himself, The way firefighters do when a scene is officially under control and the damage assessment begins. Jenna noticed that look, and I saw the panic flicker behind her eyes. It was dawning on her that she had no footing left in this crowd, no narrative to hide behind. People had begun to see the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the emotional dependencies she'd masked as spiritual discipline. She approached a small group near the stage, trying to regain some authority by offering them guidance about energetic boundaries, but her voice wavered. They listened politely, then excused themselves, saying they needed to help load supplies into a car outside. Watching them leave, Jenna's shoulders dropped in a way I'd never seen. She wasn't just losing status. She was losing the identity she'd wrapped around herself like armor. When her eyes found mine again, there was no hostility left. Only the heavy realization that I had stepped out of reach. The room had shifted, the people had shifted, and I had shifted most of all. Her collapse wasn't loud. It was quiet, internal, and complete. And none of it had anything to do with what I said, only with the man I'd become. The last volunteers were stacking chairs when the room finally fell into a quiet that felt heavier than the noise ever had. The soft hum of the air vents, the rustle of paper being thrown away, the distant sound of someone wheeling a cart down the hallway. All of it blended into a backdrop Jenna couldn't anchor herself to. She stood alone near the stage, arms wrapped loosely around herself, as if the chill in the air had found a way under her skin. I walked Claire toward the exit, but before we stepped outside, I paused. Not for Jenna, for closure, for the final shift inside myself. Jenna moved toward us slowly, each step uncertain, like she was navigating a floor she no longer trusted. She didn't try to reclaim authority this time. She didn't perform calmness or borrow phrases from her mentor. Her voice, when she finally spoke, wasn't polished. It was hesitant, stripped of the spiritual gloss she used to coat every emotion. She said she'd been lost in her process, said she hadn't realized how far she'd drifted. She said she didn't recognize the man I'd become tonight, and that scared her more than she expected. None of her words surprised me. She'd always been able to articulate the surface of her feelings, just never the roots. And now, without her circle backing her, without the mentor scripting her worldview, she didn't know how to rebuild what she'd burned down. I didn't interrupt. I didn't reassure her. I let silence sit between us because silence had become the only boundary she couldn't cross. Claire stood beside me, calm and warm, not competing, not reacting, simply existing in a way that made everything Jenna said feel even more hollow. Jenna asked if there was anything left to repair. Not dramatically, not with tears, but with the quiet disbelief of someone facing herself for the first time without guidance. I could tell she already knew the answer. She wasn't asking for another chance. She was asking for a way out of the emptiness she'd created. I stepped back just enough to make it clear. I told her, in a steady voice she couldn't reinterpret, that I hadn't disappeared. I'd simply stopped showing up in spaces where I wasn't respected. Her expression changed. Not anger, not defeat, but understanding. Claire and I walked toward the door, and Jenna stayed exactly where she was. No collapse, no scene, no spiritual explanation. Just a woman finally seeing the consequences of mistaking illusion for meaning. Outside, the night felt clean. The truck waited quietly, the air cool against my skin. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already left long before we walked out of that room. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.